Welcome to Understanding Islam, Standing Before God. This is week 6, the visitation of holy places. It's a common factor with many religious traditions that certain places are regarded as being particularly holy because they're associated with a certain person or with certain events. It's as though in that place one is drawn in a special way into the closeness of the presence of God. Now, it's obvious that God is not limited by time or not limited by space, so there is nowhere that God isn't, and there is nowhere that we can say God is more than anywhere else. But it is as though in these holy places the veil that stands between this world and the transcendent world of God is somehow thinned or lifted, so that one feels especially close to God in this place. This is especially so in the Islamic tradition when we think of the concept of barzakh. Barzakh is a state or a realm or a dimension in which human beings wait between their earthly death and the day of their resurrection. When their earthly body lies in the grave and is decomposing, their inner self, their spirit, their spiritual reality is somehow particularly present or located in that place. A certain sentience and awareness returns. Now, not surprisingly then, in the case of a man or woman of great spiritual excellence, the place where they have been buried becomes a place where people feel close to the presence of God, near their grave, associated with their memory, and therefore people want to go to visit that place. For some Muslims, this is a very important part of the Islamic tradition. For a minority of groups within Islam, this is not something that they want to encourage at all. This is taking people away from the purity of the message. If we think first of all about the Kaaba in the middle of Mecca, this is the direction in which all Muslims pray every time they turn for their formal salah. The Kaaba is sometimes called the house of God. Now, nobody thinks that God lives there, but in a sense, the closeness of God is experienced there in an intimate and intense way. Many people who make a pilgrimage, who go to visit the Kaaba in Mecca, will speak of it as though it is a place in which they feel this tremendous closeness to God. Indeed, there is a tradition that if you are going for the first time to visit the Kaaba in Mecca, as you approach toward it, you keep your eyes cast down until you are full square in front of the Kaaba itself. And then you raise your eyes and you become aware of the awesomeness of that presence of God. So we can see the idea then of a holy place. When we think about Prophet Muhammad himself, there was clearly something about him that drew the attention, drew the love, and inspired those who followed him. They not only knew that he was the messenger of God, but they felt that spiritual presence emanating from him, a charism, we could say. And so they just wanted to be in his presence, and that presence had an impact on them in helping them to change and to develop their life in a more godly way. Not surprisingly then, when people want to go to visit the tomb of Prophet Muhammad, they also speak of that intimate closeness, that somehow he is present in some spiritual, mysterious way in the nature, in the vicinity of his grave. And so people will go there in order to give him greetings and to ask him to join them in prayer. Now, it's crucially important that we get one thing straight, and that is all prayer, all worship in Islam is directed at God alone. So nobody worships the tomb of Muhammad or any other holy shrine. In the same way, prayer is addressed to God, not to the Prophet or any other person. So what's happening by going to visit a holy place like this is that people become aware of a kind of spiritual bond with the person who was buried in that place, and then to ask them to join their prayers with my prayers as I pray to God in this place. So you'll find, for example, that people going to visit a graveyard, upon entering the graveyard, will send greetings upon all those who are buried there. Not only is the Prophet's grave itself a place that people go to make visitation or ziyarah, but also items that were associated with the Prophet are places that people go and feel close to his presence. So in India, for example, we have pilgrimage centers in which a hair from the Prophet's beard, or in which the footsteps of the Prophet, the imprint of his feet on a stone that has been carried to that place, these are enshrined and people feel close to him in this way. In the area of Mecca and Medina, there are various mosques that have been erected in places where the Prophet was known to pray. And so this presence of the Prophet is not only located in Medina itself, but in a sense one can feel close to him by anything with which he was associated. This idea of a holy place is not just limited to the tomb of the Prophet himself. If one goes to somewhere like India, one is aware that there are hundreds of tombs, often very beautiful shrines or dargah, which have been built in order to commemorate the place where a holy person has been buried. The term that is used here is Waliullah, the friends of God, those of spiritual excellence, often Sufi teachers, people who helped others to make the spiritual journey of closeness to God. And so they will be places also for ziyarah or visitation. Now, just as the Prophet attracted a group of companions who followed in his way and example, so these teachers have also attracted a following of people who follow their teachings, their traditions, and who therefore want especially to visit them in the place where they have been buried. The point at which someone dies, one of these Waliullah, friends of God, is spoken of as though it were their wedding day, their wedding with God, or their earth, because now they are united with God in a way which transcends our physical bodies. These often become the days on which large gatherings of people will come to that place. They will pray to God together there. They will remember the Waliullah who is buried there. Offerings are given for the upkeep of the shrine. meals are eaten together, there will be poetry recited, there might be special songs which are sung on this occasion, and it's not unusual that there will be miracles or spiritual blessings which are available on this occasion. Now, just as we saw with the prophet himself, because of his spiritual excellence, he is able to lend his prayers to our prayers when we pray to God, so also he can be a conduit through which the power and the blessings of God descend to us. The term here that's used is barakah. Barakah is a powerful force of good that comes from God. So the barakah comes to human beings at the tomb of the holy person, whether it's the prophet or whether it is one of the waliullah, one of the friends of God. And so it's not unusual to find mysteries, spiritual practice, healing, miracles of one sort or another associated with such holy places. Now you can imagine that before the age of mass transportation, people from many far-flung parts of the Muslim world would never be able to make the Hajj and visit Mecca itself. Now the Hajj is irreplaceable. It is the once-in-a-lifetime compulsory pilgrimage to Mecca. But for people who felt that they would never have a chance of doing that, these local pilgrimages to the shrine of a local holy person became very important parts of their spiritual practice. If somebody wanted to express to God their repentance for a sin that they had committed, they might make a pilgrimage. If somebody wanted to reinforce their prayer to God asking for a favor, they might make a pilgrimage to a particular shrine. And in a sense, these shrines were held to sanctify a whole area around that place. So some cities became known as the cities of many shrines. In this sense, the whole city was a holy place. And in such places, close to the shrines of those of an earlier generation, one has a certain spiritual intimacy, one feels a closeness to God. In places where Muslims live alongside people of other faith traditions, it's not unusual that people from those other faiths will come to visit the holy places of Islam. So if one goes to the shrine in India, for example, it's not unusual to find Buddhists or Hindus or Sikhs or Christians visiting that holy place too, because God is one and one feels closer to God in that place, even if one is not a Muslim. In those countries like Syria, for example, where Christians and Muslims have lived side by side for many centuries, there are shrines there, Christian shrines or Muslim shrines, at which people from both faith traditions go. And so you will find Muslims going to a Christian shrine. For example, it might be a place especially dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And people will make a visitation there and will pray to God in that place and ask Mary to lend her prayers to theirs. In the same way, in Palestine, there are places associated with the Hebrew prophets that are visited by Jews, by Christians, and by Muslims. So this visitation and closeness to God is not confined to just one faith tradition. There are in many faith traditions, in Islam, in Christianity, for example, those people who have made the ultimate act of obedience and sacrifice to God, who have given their lives in the service of God, the martyrs. And the place where the martyr has been buried often becomes also a place of visitation, a holy place. And in that place, people will pray to God in order to ask that we may have the same strength of faith that the martyr had in offering their life to God, and also that the martyr may be a channel through which the barakah of God can flow to us. Within the Shia tradition, this idea of the visitation of holy places is taken and indeed intensified in the holy places associated with the divinely appointed imams. They were people of the highest possible spiritual excellence, and therefore they are the closest to God after the prophets themselves. And so people will go and make visitation of their shrines on the anniversaries of their death or on other occasions that were important in their lives, and indeed people will go at other times of the year just to experience the closeness of that spiritual intimacy of being at the shrine of such a holy person. The first Imam, Imam Ali, is buried, and his shrine is in Najaf in Iraq. The second, fourth, fifth, and sixth Imams were all buried in Medina, in the cemetery of Ahlulbayt there. And there was a beautiful shrine erected in their honor, which was destroyed in 1925 by a puritanical group who objected to visitations to such graves. The seventh and ninth Imams are both buried in Baghdad. The eighth Imam is the only one to be buried in Iran, in Mashhad. And then the 10th and 11th Imams are both buried in Samarra, in Iraq. Now, the shrines of all these Imams have been ennobled with beautiful buildings and facilities for people to go and make visitation there, to pray in that place, and indeed special prayers have been written and handed down to us, which are themselves called ziyarah, and the tradition is to pray those prayers in those places. When we think of the life and death, the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in Karbala, we can use that as an example to come to a deeper understanding of what is happening here. Because this event of the death of Imam Hussein in Karbala is of such great spiritual importance that it is something that is commemorated by Shia Muslims around the world every year in a period of intense mourning and commemoration. When you have something of this spiritual magnitude before God, it is something that is, as it were, lifted into the presence of God. It is taken out of a historical context. It happened in a certain year, in a certain place, and it is lifted into what we call meta-history, something beyond history itself. If you think of it this way, God is outside of time, God is outside of space, so there is no past tense with God. So an event of this sort is constantly present with God. Now, we also are constantly present with God. So when we commemorate such an event, we actually relive it, we make it present. And so people experience the emotion, the feeling that they are going through again in their commemoration the events of Karbala in such an intense way that they are spiritually united with those events in God. So just as the original events of Karbala are lifted into the presence of God, so all around the world the communities who commemorate and relive them are also lifted into the presence of God, and therefore they are moments of great spiritual intensity and intimacy, not just between the believer and God, but within the community of believers and between the believers and Imam Hussein, his companions, and the events that took place then. So we can see that this is a real reliving or representation of those events. Now again, the reality is that very few Muslims are able to get to Karbala every year. The same is true also with all the other centers of ziyarah or visitation. And so what happens all around the world in places where Shia Muslims gather, Imam Bagh as they're called, in such places replicas of those shrines have been built and are beautifully kept and preserved, and they are then placed in the midst of the community during that time of commemoration. And as the story unfolds, so there will be items which are shown to the people to remind them, to help them to relive those events. And so in this way, the act of remembrance is intensified in every community all around the world. In this way, we can understand the importance of the saying that every day is Ashura Day, the day of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. Every place is Karbala, the place of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and his companions. And the whole of humankind, all the prophets that have ever been, are, as it were, in a sense, bound up in that moment of great spiritual intensity and excellence. This is week 6 of series 2 of Understanding Islam. Earlier episodes, the whole of series 1, are available on the Ahlulbayt TV website, the on-demand section. There's an article to go with each one of these episodes, which is also available to be downloaded from my own website. Join me again next week when we're going to be looking at modesty, the special character of a Muslim. I look forward to seeing you then.